Here, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal on Shabbos
Yeah.
about how churches are having trouble getting their congregants to come back.
What can I say?
Just warning you.
Okay.
Be careful what you say at this point.
Yeah, I saw that. The shuls are having more attendance.
Yeah.
The temples especially.
You really should be sure.
Not so much the Orthodox.
You won't be ready or ready for peace. Hey.
Really? Oh, from the box.
Great.
Which one? I think I.
The Vivo is low on power.
That one.
That explains the whole set.
Of course, they have a power strip.
The thing is, I think if I remember right, Eliezer told me the camera is just never a third or so at the top,
Yeah.
and the rest is a band.
Every story
And it's supposed to have something like an each one life.
No matter how many, there's something wrong with the story.
It's really good.
I don't know, what do they use it for when it's not the shoe here?
They redid it for Moshe. Moshe Arch of Advocate about Moshe. I did it, she pointed to the website. Expanded it, and I think they took out some stories. I think in there is
The lights are. What would you use?
Ammunition. Back and stuff.
It seems like making changes to these things is coming. Rabbi Talgam told me, was it All for the Boss? He suggested I should read it, but then he said, don't just fight it. Make sure it's the first print. That's why the Rosh Hashanah doesn't have a book yet.
So, you know what? People think that for a while, you could go into different levels. But you can have seen action, right? The 5 witnesses, everyone else is on the right.
Yeah, but if you can prove that one of them is a lie.
Why does it go?
Good morning. How are you today? Where are the rest of
Where are all the boys?
I don't know.
They went somewhere?
Nobody comes.
The high school had an outshot.
What?
The high schoolers had an outshot.
What is an outshot?
Meaning that they don't have anything that issue. So it could be that the high schoolers didn't even start dominating the
So they slept in.
I think that's their schedule. They have a later shoppers for them on the Sunday.
Oh, here?
I know that's what they used to do. So my cousin, he was like, oh, I want to go to the shoe. The houses, they're all so he wants to download it and listen on the plane. So his father and my mother's father We're brothers.
So he's your mother.
They had,
What does he do?
he does networking, computers.
And those are the typical.
We have another branch of that side of the family, so my grandfather had a sister. She and her husband are living in Lakewood. My uncle, she's the one who told the story this year.
Really structured.
He didn't remember his name. He sat with him in the hospital once. But he'd been in Nevada many years ago. He used to learn with the magician. He wanted to relate with what it was starting. Around the
Like 2
hours
after
after
Friday night.
I mean, so great.
7:30.
You know, so you'll have a block
If you
where,
interrupt
you
them,
know,
it's not up to
25%
service.
service, and then after
And
3
some
blocks,
people
then,
are-
you know,
I
30%.
don't know.
And then you'll.
My grandfather
Really,
was
okay, not good.
no, not him. So his great uncle,
functioning?
my great uncle. So he had
That's
been
good.
learning in
They
Nevada.
had,
He wanted to go to
They have
Lakewood.
a,
But
early
they didn't
middle
want to take him because he was working on an accounting degree.
No,
So
fine.
he's got 1 foot out the door already.
I heard that there's.
Who was it in
like
charge
20 guys
of
coming
missions
in
in
from
Lakewood at the
West,
beginning?
Hollywood.
Whoever it
Coca-Cola?
was, saw the Rosh Hashiva and some symbolism that says, I had asked him about his father's calling.
Sorry.
Don't No, he came up and asked him to yeshiva, and he's been there ever since, in the financial office for the last 50 years, and full-time in yeshiva for a couple decades before that.
West Coca.
He's got to be about 90 already.
No, this is West.
So it's like that whole family. The chas and I went to a few weeks ago. The whole family was there. It was his granddaughter, so the ones who are making the vort now, they were all there. And something's going down to Miami. They're trying to like be all sneaky about it. Come on, let's call it what it is. I know what it is.
I have a real life Shiloh for Posek. If you have a relative that's being ordained by the JTS, are you forbidden to attend?
Half the people.
Very good question. This is your emotion.
Yeah, it's right up the alley.
Right up the motion now.
Yeah.
Half the people.
Wow.
Are like kids who grew up in
Yeah.
Hollywood.
It's a great question.
So they're.
I think the
they're
answer is
not gonna talk to their parents.
Not allowed to attend. No.
Yeah. Okay, ready for action?
Josh, good morning.
I got it.
Where are the sheets? Good
We
morning.
have good authority from Rav Moshe Feinstein.
Both of these sheets will become a collector's edition.
Yes, the first two sentences.
2 sides.
Are you coming out with the second version?
The famous Posek.
See if it gets banned.
Huh?
I do plan on talking about some controversial stuff today, so hold on to your seats.
Word of Rabbi.
We'll see what happens.
That's the
point of the share.
Rabbi, the New York Board of Rabbis.
Yup, yup.
I remember we used to have a TV show when I was a kid.
Sunday mornings.
Sunday morning, yeah.
Okay, good morning. I'd like to thank everyone for coming, especially today is a very festive number. Baruch Hashem, this is the 400th Sunday morning Rise and Learn Halacha Share, and really is a tremendous tribute to the people, which some of them are in this room, who started it, along with obviously Rabbi Sharfman Zatzal, who gave the majority, I believe close to 260
Wow.
of 240 of these shiurim. So a big yashikayach to everyone who was involved. Obviously, longevity itself is a tremendous schus and an accomplishment, and 400 shiurim on so many different topics is really something phenomenal. So Baruch Hashem for that, and Bez Hashem, we should be zocha to continue to climb, and we should all be here to celebrate shir number 500.
Amen.
In honor of the occasion, I decided to do something which I've been shying away from doing for a while. We started this within the shiurim, a series that we'll do a few times a year, where instead of the shir being on a specific halachic topic, and analyzing that and bringing all different poskim about that topic, we sort of start to share the other way, where the shir is about halachic authority, and we go through his psakim. Kananahara, this is the 10th of those shirim since I started them. We gave shirim on Rav Henkin, Rav Adji Yosef, Rav Scheinberg, Rav Nissen Karelitz, Rav Shmuel Wozner, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Rav David Feinstein, Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, and Rav Aaron Cutler. But I've shied away from touching a personality like Rav Moshe because he's so big and so daunting. There's so much about Rav Moshe. It's not like a little pet project, and there's so much known about Rav Moshe. And I always shied away from talking about him. But being the fact that it's shir number 400, and how can we give a tribute, to what we've been doing here? I'm sure Rabbi Sharfman quoted Rav Moshe, listening to many of the shirim. There aren't too many weeks where Rav Moshe's name is not mentioned. Definitely the foremost Posek of generations, and thus I felt it was a fitting tribute to have a shir about Rav Moshe himself when we hit such a milestone. I do feel still it's quite a challenge to speak about Rav Moshe, and whatever will be said today is scratching the surface. I, Baruch Hashem, went through literally dozens of svarim, Igros Moshe's, but there are many other svarim nowadays, and all different things quoting Rav Moshe, connected with Rav Moshe. Went through a lot of that. I'm zoche that my wife's grandfather, Shmuel Neumann Zatzal, was very close to Rav Moshe, was actually part of a small chabura that did shimush by Rav Moshe, together with Rav Shmuel first, Rav Shimon Eider, and an elite group of poskim who were very close to Rav Moshe, and within the family, thus, we have a lot of connection to Rav Moshe. I also had the chance to do shimush by one of Rav Moshe's closest talmidim, Rav Bluth, who's somebody who was Rav Moshe's gabbai for last decade and a half of his life, and it was extremely close, and definitely in many ways personified Rav Moshe. So, with that introduction, hope today to focus on three aspects. We'll soon drop them. Three aspects of Rav Moshe. But before we go to those three aspects, just a short biography of who Rav Moshe was. Rav Moshe was born just before the turn of the 20th century, 1895. He was born Zayin Adar in Russia. And his birth date, obviously, being born on the date of Moshe Rabbeinu's Patira, Moshe Rabbeinu's actual birth. His father, who himself was a Chashuv Rav David Feinstein, named his son Moshe after none other than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe ad Moshe lo kam ke Moshe. And this young child, people give eidos. They remember this child sitting in the shul as a young bacher, just sitting and learning. His sister, later became the Rebbetzin Small, would bring him food into the basement. Actually, he wouldn't have to go home to eat. She would bring him his lunch and just sit and learn Gemara. 13-year-old bacher. They all knew the legend of this young Rav Moshe Feinstein. He learned, if you consider a Pesach Pruskin, one of his Rebbeim Muvhakim, and basically at a young age, Rav Moshe already became a Rav himself. A Rav, in this yeshiva, the name of the shtat carries extra significance. The Rav of a place called Luban. Rav Moshe was the Rav of the city of Luban,
And that's where he was. In Russia, Moshe was Zocha to have 4 children born. What people don't know, the oldest child of Moshe was a son, Pesach Chaim, who unfortunately was nifter young back in Russia. After that son, there were 2 daughters. One later became Rebbetzin Shizgal. The other one later became Rebbetzin Tendler. Husband just passed away. And the 3rd son born in Russia was Reb David Feinstein, Reb David. L'maisa in Russia, there was, as we all know, tremendous pressure from the communists, and so much so it was Moshe was just sitting and learning and holding up his whatever he could, his kehila. But it came to a point, the persecution against the Rav, the persecution against Jews, was getting too much. And Moshe decided that he has to leave Russia. And Baruch Hashem, he got out of Russia, and he came to America in 1937. After coming to America, a little bit later, his son Reb Ruvain was born. Reb Ruvain's the only child of Reb Moshe to be born here in America. Recently, Reb Ruvain has it told over, just a fascinating story, just as an aside. There's an age gap, tremendous age gap between Reb Ruvain and Reb David. And that was because, in the time in Russia, even though Reb Moshe gave a heter to a certain mikvah in the town, but felt for himself that wasn't the right thing, and Reb Moshe wasn't able to have children between the gap of Reb David and Reb Ruvain. Now, fascinating. That's part of the persecution that Reb Moshe was fleeing, in Russia.
Is this in Russia proper? Lithuania was
Yeah.
independent.
No, he was in Russia. L'maisa, when Reb Moshe came to America, he pretty soon after, for a little other stint, but Reb Moshe became the Rosh Yeshiva of Mesivta Tiferes Yerushalayim, commonly known as MTJ in the Lower East Side. And the building, if you want to see it today, it's you might as well call it a museum, because not much has changed in over 100 years that the institution has been there, much like many things in the Lower East Side. And definitely worth a trip to see how the Lower East Side in its heyday was one of the biggest Jewish communities in the world, and thriving with Yidden. And Moshe was the Rav, we'll soon talk about it, was the Rav of the Lower East Side, Posek of the Lower East Side. And Moshe started off, having his yeshiva, teaching Talmidim. He started writing Eiros Moshe years before. In fact, one of the saddest parts was when Moshe left Russia, a lot of his ksavim that he had through those years were actually taken by the Russians. And if someone ever gets into Stalin's archives, maybe they'll find them one day. But Moshe was tremendously upset over the loss of his ksavim, his dear. And but in America he started anew and started writing Eiros Moshe, and people started coming to him with shilos. But really, Reb Moshe burst onto the scene after the death of Rav Aaron Kotler. When Rav Aaron Kotler was nifter, the whole thing.
Available in English today?
Huh?
Are they available in translation?
For the most part, not. There is no English version of the Eiros Moshe. That would be quite a job for Art School to do. And the reason also is most of his tshuvas, there are some that are short answers. Most of them, he's going through sources upon sources upon sources. And it's really reserved for the scholarly students, for Talmidei Yeshiva, Talmidei Chachamim to go through. They're not short tshuvas. Everything is, there are some in there that go pages and pages. Wow. Okay.
More often,
Yes.
you will see, my recollection is many times, you will see Eiros Moshes quoted in Shiurim as opposed to Dibros Moshes.
Right.
Because of the way he wrote his Igros Moshe, his Chuvas, many times he quotes Gemaras, and he actually says Pshat in the Gemara, as opposed to, so the Dibros is very difficult one to go through. People will find,
The Igros is the maskana of his Dibros.
But he many times he will quote a Gemara in the Igros and
Yes.
say, I'll tell you what, this, you might think this Gemara is a question on what I'm saying. No, this is Pshat in that Gemara, and it's indicative, now you know how he learned that Gemara.
So really the time that Rav Moshe sort of had to himself was America. Well, Rav Henkin was very much involved in Psak, and Rav Aaron Kotler was running it. But come the 1960s, Rav Aaron was Nifter, then Rav Moshe took over as the Gadol Hadar, and was very, very involved in the Tzarchei Tzibur. And he may not have had the time just to sit back, he still gave shiurim in yeshiva, but definitely didn't have the time to learn in the classic sense of just going through Gemaras. He would chop up. One of the famous things about Rav Moshe was being a prakim between the aliyos in shul. He always would be chazering, always be learning, and he took advantage. The Ma'aser of Rav Moshe led Klal Yisrael for decades, from the 60s till he was nifter in 1986. Tanis Esther in New York City. I remember my father told me he was at the Levaya. You should see the pictures. There were 100,000 people there in the Lower East Side on East Broadway. You see the aerial shots, unreal, the size of Levaya. America never had anything like that. Huge, huge Levaya, followed by a Levaya in Eretz Yisrael where he was buried, Har Menuchos. There came out on Purim, and there they had 250,000 people in 1986. Torah world was much smaller, and those numbers were absolutely depict what an impact that Rav Moshe had on the entire world. In fact, when they're planning for the Levaya in Eretz Yisrael, there were some that said, no, maybe we'll get 20 or 30,000. Rav Moshe was in Eretz Yisrael one time in his life. 1964, we'll talk about it. He went for the Agudas Kanisa Gedola. He went. So that means he wasn't in Eretz Yisrael for the last 20-something years of his life. Was there one time? Come on, didn't really have interactions with a lot of the people in Eretz Yisrael. So they figured, maybe we'll get 20, 30,000 people. Some estimated, and Rav Shach said no. They had 250,000 people there at the Levaya. Unbelievable. Now, the three areas that I'd like to focus on in describing Rav Moshe is, number one, Rav Moshe being, as we titled today's share, the Posek of America and the world, what it means to be a worldwide Posek. Secondly, I will touch on some of I will put the words in quotes, the controversial psakim of Rav Moshe. And thirdly, the topic I'd like to talk about is Rav Moshe was a posek of the common man, common person, and describe Rav Moshe's relationship with the average person. Now, in terms of Rav Moshe being a worldwide, the stature of Rav Moshe being a posek, Rav Moshe was someone that was totally appreciated by the Gedolim of his generation. We're talking about Rav Henkin, Rav Aaron Kotler, Rav Shach, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav Eliashiv, all the poskim before and after, all gave tremendous respect to Rav Moshe. Rav Eliashiv remembers the story of when he dahered how great Rav Moshe was, that Aaron Kotler came to Eretz Yisrael in the 50s. Aaron Kotler came to Eretz Yisrael, and Rav Eliashiv and him had to discuss a very important matter. Rav Eliashiv was waiting for Rav Aaron to come. So when Rav Aaron came, they discussed this matter. Rav Aaron felt it was a very big shaila, and he says there's only one person in the world who answers the shaila. At that time, we're talking 1950s, international call from Israel to America was quite expensive. Rav Aaron says we have to make a phone call to Rav Moshe. He's the only one who can paskin such a thing. So Rav Yoshev and Rav Aaron Cutler were sitting on the phone listening to Rav Moshe Feinstein for 45 minutes. That's how much they valued who Rav Moshe was. And
There's more to that story.
oh,
You know that,
you have to, hold on. But Lamaisa, all the Gdolim were tremendously machshavim. And the psakim that Rav Moshe gave were psakim that very much were ahead of their times. Psakim where he was able to see a situation and directly see Gemaras, Rishonim, Achronim, that he was able to touch up a situation. You know, most poskim, the way they would deal with something is they'll go through the tshuvas over the ages, right? You go through the precedents in law, right? And you look back, okay, you make a psak. Rav Moshe was big enough that he was able to start at the Gemara. Let's put everything else aside. Let's start at the Gemara and work our way down. Rav Moshe wasn't fearful to argue with great achronim from earlier generation, like the Chassam Sofer. Rav Moshe would take on and it irked people. We'll soon see, phase 2. But Rav Moshe had the platos, had the strength, the backbone to look. This is Pshat. I'm starting from the Gemara. I'm showing him, work my way down, and he was ready to paskin. I'll give, obviously some examples of things which had tremendous impact. Timers, Shabbos clocks. Rav Moshe was the one who permitted Shabbos clocks, but he was nervous. In fact, just this morning, someone mentioned this point to me. He was nervous about allowing things to run in the automation because Rav Moshe foresaw once you start doing it with one thing, then maybe your whole house could run in the automation. Rav Moshe foresaw decades ago a smart world where everything could potentially run automated ahead of time. For the record, I don't want to go into this, that's its own topic, but Rav Moshe only gave a heter for timers for lights. That was the one area he mastered it. In fact, he didn't give it for air conditioners, which is one of the other most common usages. Remember in the Yeshiva Tiferes Yisrael, the building manager was a Talmud of Rav Moshe, and he would ask me if I was around the yeshiva on Erev Shabbos to press the button to turn on the AC, on the timer for the AC, because as a Talmud of Rav Moshe, he wouldn't use timers on air conditioning. Moshe mastered the situation, developed his makel to use it for ACs too. But Rav Moshe's actual psak was limited to light because he was nervous about everything being used on Shabbos with that.
Like a thermostat?
Yeah.
You wouldn't use AC on Shabbos?
The thermostat's different, because programming itself. But the olden days where you have those, we don't have the units where you plug it in and you want it on at certain times, off at certain time with a timer. That's where Moshe wasn't did not give a blanket heter for. Yeah. Now, this is an issue in the firmer world we live today. People don't necessarily use this heter, but to realize how important the heter was when he gave it, Rav Moshe gave a heter to Chalav Stam. Rav Moshe held, again, I don't want to go into this topic as its own share, but Rav Moshe held that in America, it doesn't apply necessarily outside of America, so it's important to note, but within America, milk produced under the watchful eye of the government with a kashrus. But Lamaisa, that milk fully has a din, it's not that it's mutter, it has a din of Chalav Yisrael. And thus, in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, before everyone got too from, but people very much used that heter of Chalav Stam, and that allowed people, okay, in New York you could get Chalav Yisrael. What happens if you live outside of New York? Not so easy. Rav Moshe, that itself allowed Jewish communities to flourish outside the metropolis where you have your classic Chol Yisrael, major psak. Moshe dealt with multiple shilos. I know Rabbi Sharfin had shiurim about this, about abortions. Allowed, not allowed, what situations, challenges where the child could be endangering the life of the mother. How do you view that? Moshe's classification of a rodef. Moshe had tremendous Siamese twins. Moshe dealt with like the tremendous shilas. You know, he didn't need the New York Times to give him the kavod, but his psakim were well known as he was the arbitrator of Jewish law, beyond a doubt. Area I would like to focus on, just within this aspect of how far-reaching his psakim were, and the major impact, was really battling the reform and the conservative movements in America. Now, as we know, the biggest threat to Torah Judaism from the time Rav Moshe landed on these shores was within, Reform and conservative Judaism. And there were so many shilos of doing things with them. Throughout his tshuvas, Rav Moshe refers to, in, I dare say, a condescending language to Reform and conservative rabbi. Instead of using the word Rav, he would write out rabbi, like R-A-B-B, Reish, Ayin, Beis. In quotes, they're called a rabbi, but they're not real.
You don't see this as much anymore.
Right, because unfortunately the battle's over.
Yeah.
There's not much left. But it's unfortunate because those people are probably not Jewish anymore. But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So Rav Moshe had to deal with psakim. Okay, right now, the majority of America is under the auspices of conservative reform. How do we deal with their Gittin and Kedushin? Or better, how do we deal with their marriages? And Rav Moshe came out with a monumental psak that I have on top of your sheets. He goes, Moshe, Evan Ozer, Chelik Aleph, Siman Ayin Vav. That Rav Moshe paskins, you know what? If there's Kedushin, a marriage ceremony performed by a reform, here he has it. No, Sheina Kedushin She'itz a reform a rabbi, right there in the second line. Klum. Kedushin performed by a reform rabbi is nothing. Spar Hativ Shal Yedim Ksherim. Shronas the Bas. Where are you going to get your kosher Eidim? Famiraso Yam Kadeshusly. Feel like Shnei Ksherim Sha'amdu Mirachok. Lamaisa, you don't have a Rav Kosher and a Mumcha to be Masada Kedushin. Goes through all different things. So therefore, basically, Rav Moshe made a major psak. If a wedding officiated by a Reform conservative rabbi is not considered a valid Kedushin, then you solve problems, because 95 or more percent of the time, if that marriage doesn't work, which go through the stats in America, if that marriage doesn't work, they're not getting a get. When they remarry, if they have a child, that child would be a mamzer, if that original Kedushin was a valid Kedushin. So thus, by Rav Moshe invalidating the Kedushin Me'ekara, there is no kosher Kedushin. There weren't kosher Eidim, even if there were Orthodox Jews present. The Rav, the rabbi performing it was not Shomer Torah mitzvahs. So then you have a problem. Then you have not a valid Kedushin, which may well mean if the woman decides later to leave the marriage and marry someone else without a get, the kid is not a mamzer. And thus Rav Moshe set up a situation where we could have a Baal Tshuva movement, where we could have people coming from conservative and reform homes where there's no question about their yichus. Because being the fact, whatever happened before was not an issue of a legitimate Torah marriage, the kids are okay. Rav Moshe literally saved I found this, that hair written in the Hakdama to Chil Ches. The family of Moshe uses this psak as such an example of the far-reaching consequences of Moshe's shoulders to make such a decision. Now there are others. Rav Henkin. Rav Henkin was machmer.
He picketed.
Rav Henkin felt that it was a valid kedushin, and you do have problems with mamzerim.
Yeah.
But Rav Moshe argued, and he felt clear that his psak was true. At the same time, out of deference to Rav Moshe was a tremendous honor, and out of deference to Rav Henkin, he would encourage anyone in these situations l'chachila to try to make sure that there was a get. But if not, Rav Moshe was ready to stand up, and this was the psak that was accepted. That the kid is okay.
Rav Moshe has 2 great granddaughters in Miami who are married to Bali Shuba.
That's a beautiful postscript, right? The fact that Rav Moshe Feinstein himself here in Florida has grandchildren that married Bali Tshuva, it's amazing. We definitely, where would Klal Yisrael be without the major contributions of so many Bali Tshuva? And Rav Moshe opened the door through this wasn't being, this was halachic. This was not just bending over backwards. This was the Gadol Hador, the Posek Hador, finding a path, finding a way to matter it. Now, I found a fascinating Shiloh. My wife's grandfather, Rabbi Neumann Zatzal, presented this Shiloh to Rav Moshe. If you look in the Masoros Moshe, it quotes that Rav Neumann asked a Shiloh, there was a Bachur in Yeshiva who was dating a girl. And he looked into her yichus. He found out that the girl's mother was previously married. At the wedding, though, the Masada Kedushin, the guy did a pretty major background check. The Masada Kedushin was a conservative rabbi, except, though, this guy was a Shomer Torah, was Shomer Shabbos. Which you had. You had quote-unquote Orthodox people who were conservative rabbis. So the Shiloh was, Rav Moshe, maybe we found a case where your psak won't cover. Here's the case. Now the story was, the guy found out about this, realized the girl didn't know about it. He was ready to end the relationship. This Shiloh, they were asking Rav Moshe, should he tell the girl that Pashup Shah, if Rav Moshe's psak doesn't cover her, she's a mamzer, she's a mamzeres, and thus that would kill her shidduchim. So Rav Moshe, you look, Yachshav Archakru Matzos Mitzias Azos Zematzav Kasha Ma'od. Moshe himself said this is a rough situation. But Maisa ain't put the end of the tshuva, but Moshe himself, even in this case, figured out a way to matter her. He felt, first of all, if the guy's working as a conservative rabbi, he doesn't fully have the dinim of a nice Orthodox Jewish boy, and he canceled with that. Plus, Rav Moshe, the girl was known to be a fine girl. He says, Rav Moshe, the Gemara talks about that mamzer has bad midos. He says it's clear this girl doesn't have those bad midos. Again, I don't know how I could, Rav Moshe had the shoulders, and Rav Moshe personally felt in that situation, you don't have to tell her, she's fine, she can continue in shidduchim. And for all that we know.
In that case, he says that's more in that case. He uses that in a different
Yes,
case.
I'll show you. But, yeah,
But that
he used in this case too, which is right, much bigger chiddush.
But by Nidi has a svara. By
Yes.
Nidi he says maybe she somehow went
Right.
to the beach, even though it's highly unlikely. But he says, but it's highly unlikely that she would have the. That's
Good.
okay.
Right. It was a tziruf. He already felt that you can't call this guy a shomer Torah mitzvos, and thus say it was a
maybe-
valid Seder Kedushin. But
Maybe
Mitzvah
he was mitzaref with the fact that maybe the Kedushin really wasn't a good Kedushin. Maybe somehow the Kedushin was not
right,
a good Kedushin.
right, that's what you're saying,
Yeah.
right. Now, so this, I think, is one example of Rav Moshe, how far-reaching these psukim were. It really opened the door for Baruch Hashem, so many people to be part of Klal Yisrael and not to be forever, use the word, ostracized and not part of Klal Yisrael, being mamzerim. Now, with this, Rav Moshe was a big posek, and you brought up people picketing, such a psak. When you take on and you make strong psakim, you're going to find resistance. And Rav Moshe was a big person, and he was able to withstand, these fights. I want to talk about the tshuva, which one of the most famous, I'll use the word famous, others might use the word infamous, tshuvas that people picked on to fight Rav Moshe, was Rav Moshe's heter for artificial insemination. When the processes were being developed for a child to be born sort of outside common practice, outside of the womb, and classic womb. So Rav Moshe gave a heter for artificial insemination, specifically using the seed of a guy. Dafka a guy. And Rav Moshe's logic was, the Gemara talks about cases. A woman could be impregnated sitting on bed sheets where she picked up something, or it talks about in the bathhouse. And there the chashash, the post can bring the Isser, so made of parrots, quoted by Taz, that you can find on the back of your sheets. So there's an issue of we don't want a child born in Klal Yisrael where there's no yichus. You do not know and you could end up having a situation where you could have siblings and relatives, close relatives, mamash have mamzerim, mamash have arayos. This child could be, you don't know who's the Jewish father, who's the father of the child. So Rav Moshe says, I hear the problem, but we could get around it. Because if the seed is from a goyim don't have any yichus. In the halachic world, it only follows the mother, not the father. So thus, in such a scenario, there's no problem. If the seed is from a guy, that could practically implant a Jewish lady, she could have a child, there won't be any problems. That's our emotion pasuk. Obviously, whoa.
Whoa.
That's like, shake it. People were definitely up in arms. Now, Rav Moshe himself talked about this as a potential eitzah where people are very much, been married for many years, they want to have children, can't have children. It's very clear. If you have a situation, which nowadays there are many means to do it, where you can empower the father to do it, great. Use the father's seed even outside of the womb, the Jewish father, great. The Moshe matters that too. But here, where it's impossible to utilize the father, it won't be a kiyum pruvu, not for the man, not for the woman. There's no mitzvah on the woman, but to have a child. Rav Henkin was, says, let them adopt a child. Anyone knows in the world today, adoption is a very hard thing, and very not pashut. Moshe has many shuvas about, adoption in halacha is probably, even more complicated and not so pashut in many ways. So Rav Moshe matter this. Not only did he matter it, he wrote about this in probably about 4 or 5 places. Years later, I'll see after the tax, I'll show you what Rav Moshe stood up to. But I'll label three different fronts that Moshe fought on this. The first one, I'll say who it was because it was quite famous, was the Satmar Rav of Yoel Teitelbaum, who till this point had a pretty good relationship with Moshe. Him and his Hasidim fought Moshe vehemently against us.
Tooth and nail.
There were bomb threats on Moshe's building on FDR.
Whoa.
There were thugs that came by the yeshiva. It was, as they say, Labadik. I remember a story. The Chashav Rav, who was the Bochin in Chavetz Chaim Yeshiva for Smicha, or Paltiel, friend, respected who Rav Moshe was, and actually was so upset about the tax that Satmar was giving one day, they actually went down to the Lion's Den to Williamsburg. They basically clapped on the bima on the Beis Medrash. Anyone who wants to attack Rav Moshe, I'm here to defend him. Unsent, Rav Moshe didn't send him. Went down. Our friend Kanan O'Hara was over 6 feet tall, and he was a Gavra, and he went after them. Lemaisa, as a postscript, when Rav David was nifter, Rav Zalman Leib, Satmar Rebbe of was it Rav Zalman Leib or Rav Aaron? I forgot which one. But one of the sons, the current Satmar Rebbe's, actually came to be master to Rav David. You know, if you're following the score, that's a peace treaty. After years later, you know, Shalom, you know, respect to Moshe was. Really, it's interesting. There's a story that in 1964, when Moshe went to the Knesset Gadol in Eretz Yisrael, the one time he was there, he was asked to meet with the Eida Charedis. The Eida Charedis is basically the Satmar's hand in Eretz Yisrael. And they had a off the records meeting, and Satmar said that they said about Satmar that it really wasn't this tshuva that they were after you. Really, pshat was the Hasidim were turning to Rav Moshe as a posek. You go through the tshuvas in Rav Moshe, there are tons and tons of shilos that was said by Hasidic rebels, by Hasidim. Rav Moshe became the posek, not just of the Litvisha American world, he became the posek of the entire America, including the Hasidim. And it was somewhat of a power struggle. And the Rebbe picked on the red herring, maybe a weak point where he knew people who rally up against the shegitz, artificial insemination, something that goes against, you know, their principles to wage war. But that was really, in fact, there was one time that Moshe met a delegation of these Rabbanim, Hasidic Rabbanim, Satmar Rabbanim, not the Rebbe, but others. They came and they met with him. It seems Reuven probably they got together all the chevra from the Lower East Side. The apartment, they said, was packed because they were afraid Chas V'Shalom they're going to attack Rav Moshe. So they brought all the chevra, the strong arm people, to be there at the meeting, and they said they all attacked Rav Moshe with questions, and Moshe knocked them off like flies, and then one of them admitted. He says, the Rebbe actually told us we shouldn't try to talk to you in halacha because you're going to kill us. One of the Rabbanim who came to that meeting to attack Rav Moshe later said he was so blown away by him, he became one of Rav Moshe's closest chassidish, the Tinker Rav, became one of his closest supporters because he appreciated who Rav Moshe was. There's another story. There's a whole sefer. I remember this. I was branching here 25 years ago. One Shabbos afternoon, I went for Rabbi Luban, who just came off the boat from Eretz Yisrael, came here. I was with him on Shabbos. We went to daven early mincha by Kal Chasidim, right there. So we got there a few minutes early. Rabbi Luban goes to this farm shack. All of a sudden I hear him say, "I can't believe this." He pulls off the top shelf, dusts it off. There's a sefer there, Mana Li Geras. That sefer was written by a Rav. Learned in the Chachmei Lublin in Europe. The entire sefer, you read the cover page throughout the sefer. The sefer is written to attack I don't want to use the language, rough Hebrew language, against this evil person disseminating and decimating things against the Torah to the Jewish people. This Rav was convinced that Moshe Feinstein was Bilam Harasha, was Korach, was someone who was destroying Klal Yisrael, and he's going to save Klal Yisrael by writing halachic responses against Igros Moshe. The language in the Sefer is totally disrespectful. In fact, the publisher, the same person who published the Igros Moshe, published that Sefer. It's actually the same type set.
Just give me equal time.
And the publisher called up Moshe ahead of time to ask, is it okay to publish it? And Moshe, being the Anov that he was, said, yes, sure, it's Parnasa. Give someone a Parnasa. And he let him do it. He let someone write a sefer with the most scathing remarks against him. Truth be told, the MS stands, history, no one knows who that Rav is, no one ever heard of him. But obviously Moshe remained with his a close Talmud. And the third story, which is even more, there was a certain Rav Kanoi. It's never good to be a Kanoi. A certain Kanoi from Boston who attacked Rav Moshe vehemently on many things. And years later, quote unquote Litvisha Rav, I won't tell you where his son is today, but this Rav attacked Rav Moshe. Years later, he was arrested, indicted on tax fraud. He found out that Rav Moshe knew the judge who would be issuing the sentence. He came to Rav Moshe without offering any sort of mechila, demanding that Rav Moshe write him a letter of recommendation that he should be excused from punishment. And Rav Moshe, when he walked out of the house, just then Rebbetzin Feinstein was coming in from doing shopping. What in the world is he doing here? She knew who he was. He said, you didn't need it, so I wrote him a letter of recommendation.
Yeah, life in prison.
That's not what Rav Moshe said. Rav Moshe did not recommend life in prison. But Maisi got him off. Quite amazing. So the world might have leveled all these attacks on Rav Moshe, and Moshe just flipped it off. Ish Moshe Anamod. And the final area, which actually segues into it, the Ish Moshe Anamod, is Rav Moshe was the Posek for the common person. Do you know how you were able to ask a shayla to Rav Moshe? You knocked on his door, you called up his phone number, and you asked a question. Rav Moshe didn't really have bodyguards, and he had access, he had people Meshamashim, but Rav Moshe was accessible to people all the time. He was the Rav, he viewed himself as the Rav of the Lower East Side, and he took care of everything the community needed. The community chametz was sold from MTJ, from the yeshiva. He took care of selling their chametz. When there's needed to be a mikveh built in the Lower East Side, Rav Moshe went door to door knocking on doors to raise money for the mikveh. I remember at Bluth last year, he spent a lot of time fundraising for a mikveh, which unfortunately never even got built. And in retrospect, I understood why did he dedicate so much effort. That's what he saw what his Rebbe did. Community needs something, I'll take care of it. Rav Moshe dealt with crazy people, crazy shilas. I came across a shilah, I could show it to you. Masoros Moshe brings down, someone asked Rav Moshe a shilah if he could daven for his dog. His dog passed on. Wants to make sure that no, this is not a joke. All dogs go to heaven. No. He wanted to make sure that his dog would do it. That was a shayla that Moshe dealt with. Huh? What did he say? Hold on to see the tshuva. There's this crazy guy that hocked Moshe as well as his son-in-law, Rav Shizgal. They called the guy the professor of the Lower East Side. This guy claimed to be, like the FBI's chief, advisor. Meanwhile, he was like walking around all day with a transistor radio to his ear, getting phone calls. In Queens, we used to call the guy Superman. But similar, there are people, unfortunately, that don't have it all there. I found there were multiple people. I saw one story, but I cross-referenced it to another story. There were multiple people who Moshe dealt with who thought they were Mashiach. One of them where Moshe got a get from, figured out, all the Rabbanim Posek, the guy wasn't sane enough to give his wife a get. So Moshe came up with a chap. He told the guy, he says, if I give you $500, that for the next month, you won't reveal it to anybody. You'll keep quiet that you're a Mashiach. Would you do it? The guy says, $500? Sure. But Moshe says, he's not a shota. Shota doesn't have no appreciation of money. This guy does. As soon as he said that, write a get right now. There's a Rosh Hashiva once brought his Talmud, who thought he was Mashiach, to Rav Moshe. And Rav Moshe, learned with him all the halachas of the Rambam, what the signs are for Mashiach, and told him, sorry, I don't think you cut it. In yeshiva, there was a story. There was a Talmud in the yeshiva, came from a very poor background, ended up getting engaged to a Taimani girl. Also had no money. This is must be the early 50s. And there were shilas. The boy had no money. He was going to get married on the roof of the yeshiva. Talk about
Don't jump off.
cheap. Right, cheap way to make a wedding. Got married on the roof of the yeshiva. The roof actually, this is the Chavetz Chaim yeshiva in the Forest Hills. Way before your time, I
think I know the story, but
and
he was a survivor also. He had no family.
when Moshe was consulted, there were a lot of shilas with his Taimani girl and different minhagim and all different things. And Moshe got a few of these shilas, and he realized that it's really a complicated situation. So Moshe said, instead of just passing the shilah, Moshe says, I'm coming to the wedding. So Moshe, to help out with the shilah, said, forget it, I'm going to come to the wedding. He showed up to the wedding, Rav Penuch sees him there, and he said, okay, Posek Ador is here, you have to be Masada Kedushin. And Moshe says, Chas Shalom, you're his Rebbe, you're going to be Masada Kedushin. I'm just here to help out. That was Rav Moshe. By the way, that was the wedding of Rav Mordechai Goldstein Zatzal, the founder, later became the founder of the diaspora yeshiva. He himself was Makar of many, many people. But I'll end off with one interesting story. This is a little bit more than the common man, but Rav Moshe dealt with, as a leader, so many different things, so many different people. And I guess in the early 80s, when Menachem Begin became Prime Minister of Israel, this is actually before some of the peace treaties talking about.
1977.
Yeah. So there was a big meeting in Rav Moshe's house between Begin, Rav Moshe, Rav Yaakov, and Rav Hutner. Three Gedolim of America, with Menachem Begin. And, so before the meeting, the Secret Service comes in, they have to do a bomb sweep. And they start looking all over Moshe's apartment, check, any bombs, So they're sitting there with Rabbi Yaakov, and yes, what's going on there? What's those? He said, they're checking for bombs. So Rav Hutner says, bombas? Oh! In Moshe's house! There's tons of bombas! Look at these chufas! Bomb after bomb after bomb! That was Rav Hutner's sense of humor. But Rav Moshe he was a lightning rod, he was a bomb. He was somebody who, as we saw, his psukim to this day charted the path for American Jewry, charted the path for world Jewry. Rav Moshe was someone who was able to withstand the pressure and the attacks most 99.9%. I would say most Gedolim who were attacked and threatened the way that Moshe was over his psakim would just give up. In one of those biographies that we mentioned earlier that we did, we spoke about a world-renowned Posek Gadol who had a breakdown from being attacked as a youth by in his younger years by people against him. But Moshe withstood it all with tremendous anava and was able to continue to lead Klal Yisrael, and not just lead Klal Yisrael as a whole. He never forgot the simple people that lived in Lower East Side, and all look back, all the things that Baruch Hashem, you saw the tremendous tributes, tremendous love that was poured out. In fact, I think tonight is actually the dinner of Moshe's Yeshiva, MTJ. But all the love that was poured upon Rav David Feinstein. Rav David Feinstein, one of the greatest legacies that Rav Moshe left. Up there with his Igros Moshe, his son Rav David, Badal Chaim, his son Rav Ruvain, are such normal people who are there for the average Yid, no stoltz, just do the Ratzon Hashem. This is what Hashem wants. I'll end with just one story. Simcha Wasserman, son of Rabbi Chanan, himself a tremendous machanach, says he once bought for his wife, fortunately they were alone, they never had any children, once bought for his wife 2 biographies. He bought a biography of a certain Hasidic Rebbe, and he bought the biography of Rav Moshe. He told his wife, in this biography, the Rebbe, you'll see the miracles of that Hashem could make for people. And he says, in this biography about Rav Moshe, you see the miracle of how a person could keep what Hashem says, the letter of the law, to be such a posek. He says, I think the second one is even more inspiring than the first. So, Baruch Hashem, we, the Americans, we're zocha to host such an Adam Gadol who in our midst, and it's some tremendous pride for this American Gullus that we had this chutz to have someone like Rav Moshe living amongst us. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and have a wonderful week. As Hashem, next week I'm not going to be here, so.